Hey everyone, it's Shot back in their video, and we're just going to be going over the new Void Tower rotation and all the intricacies that come along with it. It's actually a pretty big change this time, so be sure to pay attention because there's a lot of changes for this one. So let's go and jump into it. All right, so here we are. We're on Void Tower stage 21 here. We're in hard, and we have a couple of new rune marks here, and there are pretty significant ones. So the first one is going to be plus 70% resistance, just a flat 70% resistance buff to the enemies, which is quite significant. And then the second one is going to be at the beginning of each round, they are going to get a 50% damage reduction buff. And it's not going to fall off after you hit them. It has to fall off either you strip it or at the end of the turn. And it's at a cooldown of 2 rounds. Not only that, but this rotation, they've also added a few of the new characters. Things like Bulin, Godfrey, Gorel. These new characters affect the stages a lot. For example, Godfrey, if you're going to be running a Winstrex or a brand comp, Godfrey could be at the end of the stage. He could reset your ultimate cooldowns. If you are running brand, it could instantly reset your cooldowns and you could have a big problem there. So it's very important that you make sure you're watching out for some of those new characters because they are oftentimes in the stages. Silent is a big one that has been causing me a little bit of problems. I was able to auto all the way up to 20. I had a 20 on manual, but Silent was very, very irritating with her chance to kind of immune some of the damage. So a lot of these stages have been very, very vastly changed from the previous ones. Now the question is, we have two versions of a lot of the comps that we typically run in Void Tower. The tank comp and then the nuke comp. Are those comps viable, or what modifications do we have to go ahead and change? Well, first off, the tank comp is what I want to go over first because I think it's the easiest and the most auditable comp generally in Void Tower. Is it viable? I think 100% it is absolutely viable. The damage reduction buff doesn't really apply to them because they're not doing damage, they're doing true damage generally. And of course, the resistance buff does come into play here and is a problem sometimes. But if you're able to stack a bunch of resistance on your characters, or focus on your characters, you shouldn't have too big of a problem. For example, Charles here is 126% focus. This is good enough to land debuffs, or to land debuffs on the enemies, as long as they're not a wood type character. If they're a wood type character, you're going to get resisted every once in a while. So I don't quite have enough resistance, or a focus rather, to get through the resistance. And if I managed to go ahead and rearrange my gear, I probably would have. And Charles is the only one you really want focus on. You don't really care about focus on Rickard or Blackhorn or Methasia or anything like that. Hacker would be nice to have focus on, but it's not absolutely necessary. So I think the tank comp is perfectly viable, and I also just got through stage 20 with the tank comp. This is the one I was running here because I didn't have my Blackhorn geared out. But we can go ahead and run Charles and just see the resistance buff in action and if it actually affects anything at 126% focus. It's very similar to the last stage here, or the last rotation, because instead of building resistance, you could purely focus on focus. So running a focus amulet on Charles is very, very, very nice to run. You can see here we landed the taunt on the wood type character. And it's going to land quite frequently, but not 100%. If I go ahead and put that focus amulet on Charles here, we should have no problems. And I was running a resistance amulet previously, so there's really no difference in the tank comp. The problem actually herein lies is when you're running some of the wood stages, the damage reduction buff, you're going to have to time some of those stages if you're running a Cyrus, for example. But they're not going to have the increased defense, so overall it's going to be okay to run a tank comp, I think, throughout the whole Void Tower, except for maybe stage 60 or stage, maybe 80 or 100. Depends on really your team comps and things in the stages, and depends on your focus. Obviously, you need to make sure you're getting that high focus on Charles. I think tank comp is going to be perfectly viable, though. The second thing is, can we run a nuke comp? Well, running a nuke comp is actually very, very difficult, and I'm going to tell you a couple reasons for that. I think it's significantly more difficult to run it this rotation than last rotation, even though we don't have the defense up buff, if you don't have brand. So let's just assume I'm running Winstrex here, and I'm going to go ahead and run my standard burst or nuke comp that I ran previously. Not Lydia here. I ran Ciara, I ran Zatlux, and I ran Nathalia. I don't really have any other really solid AoE damage dealers. I normally would run defense down and I would run rage. It's very, very hard to get the focus necessary on Winstrex while also getting the speed. On my Winstrex, I'd have to rebuild her. So that's just a problem there. But normally with Winstrex, what I'd have to do is go ahead and buff with Winstrex, and I'd get the cooldown decrease here. So then I'd have to make sure I get that cooldown decreased and then Agile Leap to her on the boss wave to make sure her cooldown's up. But really the problem here is the waves. When you're running a Winstrex comp, you're going to have to get through the waves. And with this increased damage, or decreased damage rather, you're going to have a problem getting through these waves. You can see here Nathalia, we're on wave, or stage 21. But on stage, 80, 90 with Nathalia, I was having trouble getting through the initial stage sometimes with, perhaps just a basic attack, or Zatlex won't have enough damage to clear it. So the waves are going to be the problem with this increased damage up. And you can see here, I don't have the ultimate back up, but it's still not going to be a problem. I would have normally have Agile Leap here. But you can just see here, normally with Zatlex, I should be easily able to clear out one of these water characters, perhaps Celine in the back here. Let's just go ahead and hit her. Boom. You can see here, we have like 40% of her, a little bit over 45, about 45% of her damage dealt here. We're going to go to basic her just for additional damage. This damage is very, very difficult to get through. So running a normal burst comp is not going to cut it generally. What I do think is viable is running Lunar Melissa here and stalling it out for one round and then bursting afterwards is going to work on the boss stage. Remember, the waves are still going to be equally as hard because you need to get through those waves with that increased damage up, or sorry, decreased damage up when you're going to be bursting through the waves. Or you could go ahead and kind of tank through a couple of hits, but it's still going to be RNG dependent and still the same problem and a lot more time investment. Now, one thing that's very, very interesting is running someone like Imogen, Crazed Urzag, or Edicris. Why is this the case? Well, because they have the buffs, all you need to do is strip the buffs. Because you don't need to necessarily taunt them for the decreased defense from the previous Void Tower rotation, running someone like Edicris could be extremely viable. Now, if you're running Edicris, you're running Lunar Melissa or anything like that, remember, they have a 70% resistance buff. So you're going to need a lot of focus to make sure you're stripping the buffs. But someone like Edicris here, he's going to remove that one positive effect, and he's going to get that bonus attack because he's going to be removing that positive effect. So he's going to get a total of 180% damage on his ultimate and his passive. So he actually deals a decent amount. It's very much so fluff damage, kind of like if you're running a Tia. It's not going to be a lot, but he is going to be removing that buff. So that is a one way, and I think honestly a very, very solid way to just go ahead and run through it. But I don't think that it's going to be necessarily better or worse than just running a Lunar Melissa. Because if you're running Lunar Melissa, she's going to tank all the hits. You already have her built. She's going to taunt for one turn. And then the next round, you're going to go ahead and just nuke them. It's not really different between this and running Lunar Melissa, really. I think Lunar Melissa is going to be equally as good, if not better, oftentimes, if you have a tanky one. Now, if you're running Brand, this kind of is much better for you because the waves are not going to be super difficult because you can have everyone at higher speed levels because you can get that increased attack from his buffs. If you're running Winstrex, as I said, you're going to have to run either really, really high, well-geared characters, or you're going to have to run the stages a lot, which is going to be very, very rough. I think that tank comp is the go-to here. Again, same situation. The stages that don't require perma-taunting, there's going to be really no difference between this rotation and the last rotation. It's actually going to be easier because there's no stuns. You don't have to build resistance necessarily. For the stages that need a perma-taunt, like stages with Methasia maybe, or a CC, it's going to be a little bit more difficult because you're going to need those high focus levels on Charles. But other than that, you can auto through most of the Void Tower with the tank comp, I think. Based on my experience and just going through the first additional stages, there really isn't any difference between this rotation and the last rotation, except you don't need resistance. So that's very, very, very high boon there. So that'll be kind of the overview of Void Tower so far. Obviously, I'll be doing some more testing. I need to push Void Tower within the next 10 days because I need to get to this pity. I'm at 14%. I just summoned. I got a bunch of elites. And I'm nowhere near Gangello or summoning for pity. I'm 7 summons away. And if I wanted to get it from Void Tower, I need to complete basically the whole Void Tower. So I'm going to be pushing Void Tower quite hard to make sure I get enough summons to summon to pity. So we're going to see some Void Tower pushes on stream over the next couple of days. And we're going to give you some updated advice on Void Tower. So hopefully that gives you some insight into Void Tower and how everything's going to shape out. Again, I think Edicris, Lunar Melisa, things like that should be on your watch list. If you have Imogen, I think she's going to be excellent and way better than Edicris for this Void Tower rotation. That'll be it, and I'll see you in the next one.